After years of partying like rock stars, it finally caught up with this infamous band. It started with a fatal car crash. And then the band's primary songwriter and bassist, not long after, he nearly died on the floor of a hotel bathroom. In fact, just a few hours later, he busted out of his hospital room and he bummed a ride home from two fans who were having a candlelight vigil. Heard that he died on the radio. In the late 80s, this glam rock act actually finally got it together. They got clean and sober. And from this mild experience, they made a historic record led by a powerful title track that became the band's only gold single that came from dancing with death in these experiences. Let the viewer beware. We're about to enter the dark side of Hollywood. Stories coming up next on Professor of Rock, brought to you by Zenni Eyewear. Hey, music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. Tell you what, if you love music, especially the greatest songs of the rock and roll era, the best era, you're going to love this channel. Subscribe below right now and make sure that you click the bell so that you never miss out on our daily features. And also, when you have a chance, look us up on Patreon. It's an insider community where we're going to be adding so many more exclusive videos. You'll want to see that. Now it's time for another episode from our show, Number One in Our Hearts, where we celebrate a song that was so great, it should have been at the top of the Billboard Hot 100, but for some reason it came up a bit short. And in this, we celebrate what might have been, and it makes for a pretty good time. Now, the four members of LA's Motley Crue lived a hardcore life of debauchery since the formation of the band in 1981, and after 8 solid years of heathenism, they realized that if they didn't clean up their act, their career, and maybe their very lives would come to an end. Lead singer Vince Neil had already experienced a near-fatal car accident in Hollywood, and that was in late '84. He was driving under the influence. The crash tragically killed his passenger, Nicholas Dingley, who went by the nickname Razzle as the drummer for the Finnish glam rock group Hanoi Rocks. Vince and Razzle left a party to make a run to the liquor store when Vince lost control of the vehicle and smashed into another car. Even a few years later, bassist Nikki Sixx was shooting heroin with Slash and Steven Adler from Guns N' Roses and Rat's Robin Crosby when he injected himself with one last syringe of horse, and he immediately passed out cold. His bewildered friends could not revive him. In fact, Nikki was turning blue. Motley Crue is known for their elaborate live performances, which feature flamethrower guitars, roller coaster drum kits, and heavy use of pyrotechnics that include lighting Nikki Sixx on fire, in fact. But this was no stage trick. This was real-life terror with Nikki Sixx on the verge of his demise. Slash's then-girlfriend, Sally McLaughlin, recalled frantically giving Nikki mouth-to-mouth resuscitation while Slash, who was out of his head, destroyed the hotel bathroom around them. Miraculously, Nikki recovered in an emergency room a few hours later, and after ripping out the tubes from his arms, he staggered out to the parking lot, and I guess he bummed a ride from 2 teenage girls who were conducting a candlelight vigil outside of the hospital after hearing on the radio that Nikki was dead. You can read all of this about how Nikki Sixx came back from the dead in his book, The Heroin Diaries, A Year in the Life of a Shattered Rock Star. In 1988, the band collectively decided that all 4 Motley members would go into rehab at the same time and become clean and sober once and for all before starting work on their 5th studio record, The Vertex of Motley Crue, titled Dr. Feelgood. Now, the nickname Dr. Feelgood was originally given to Dr. Max Jacobson by the U.S. Secret Service during the presidency of John F. Kennedy. Dr. Jacobson was known in confidential circles for administering amphetamines via injection to prominent clients like there was Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, and the Kennedys. Thankfully, the original Dr. Feelgood, Max Jacobson, eventually had his medical license revoked. A group named Dr. Feelgood and the Interns, featuring Willie Piano Red Perryman and Beverly Guitar Watkins, put out a short ditty titled Dr. Feelgood in 1962, themed around a guy who is partial to very voluptuous and tall women.
I love a pig and then I love them tall.
There was also a 70s pub rock band from England that called themselves Dr. Feelgood, and they stayed together playing London area clubs into the 80s, and they didn't officially break up until the early 90s. Another interesting fact, Aretha Franklin recorded a song titled Dr. Feelgood in 1967. The Queen of Soul's tune was about a woman who doesn't need a doctor because her man gives her the medicine that she needs.
Got me a man named Dr. Feelgood.
We're going to go into the breakdown of the song. As we do that, the story of the song, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the frames that I fashion every single day on this channel. I love that when you go to Zenni.com to design your own pair, you can do virtual try-ons. With Zenni's mirror feature, you can make sure the frames that you choose look great on you. You got to check it out today. You're going to love it. Now, the title track for Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood was a song about a nefarious character dubbed a rat-tailed Jimmy, a small-time hood with a cozy job, dealing drugs for the Mexican mob.
Rat-tailed Jimmy's a second-hand hood, deals at Hollywood.
It all started with a thunderous Mick Mars guitar riff that made Nikki Sixx do a 360 turnaround, begging Mick to play that riff again. Rejuvenated from the rehabilitation, Motley Crue channeled all of their energy into their music. That's why I think it's one of their best albums. Dr. Feelgood would be the first album to that point where the band was sober in the recording studio. Nikki Sixx began writing lyrics that would go with Mick's powerful guitar riff that just blew everybody away. Nikki recalled that Dr. Feelgood had an entirely different set of lyrics in the early stages of the song's development. And when famed producer Bob Rock, who was hired to produce the Dr. Feelgood album, when he heard the first demo of Dr. Feelgood, the track, I guess he was underwhelmed. Can you imagine that? Rock encouraged Nikki to take a second pass at writing the lyrics. He told Nikki that he thought he was a really good lyricist. And he said, and I quote, "I think you should take another run at this like Ian Hunter or Bruce Springsteen would do," end of quote. Bob Rock's advice worked like a charm. Nikki he dug deep and he reflected on encounters that he and the band had witnessed on the streets. He then wrote the song around real-life characters that he experienced with some poetic embellishment to complete the song's sinister tale of a man who is going to be your Frankenstein. Brilliant. Cops on the corner always ignore somebody's getting paid. Jimmy's got it wired, laws for hire, got it make it in the shade. Got a little hideaway, does business all day, but at night he'll always be found selling sugar to the sweet people on the street. Call this Jimmy's town. He's the one they call Dr. Feelgood. He's the one that makes you feel all right. The opening of the song is, it's certainly a lost art. I mean, the flaming guitar on throttle with Tommy's back-breaking drums, it just built for like 30 seconds before the melodic guitar line repeats until the otherworldly vocal renderings of Vince Neil, that hits at about 50 seconds. I mean, the celebrity music of today, written by 10 to 12 marketers, would never allow a song to build like that. Now, I've always contended that Mick Mars is an extremely underappreciated guitarist. Mick invented some incredible lines over Motley's 9 studio albums. His bone-crunching guitar riff on Dr. Feelgood is definitely one of his best. As his solo in the bridge after Vince screams out guitar. One of the coolest parts of Dr. Feelgood is the swirling guitar vamp under Mick's electronically processed demon voice saying, "Listen to Jimmy, come play with Dr. Feelgood." I gotta tell you, man, that section of Dr. Feelgood to this day still gives me the willies. Tommy Lee, man, he just struts his stuff as one of rock's greatest drummers on Dr. Feelgood, giving his DW drum kit a merciless back alley pounding that just energizes the song's endorphin euphoria. Throughout the Dr. Feelgood album, Vince Neil sounds really noticeably revitalized. His vocals are fuller, more convincing, especially on Kickstart My Heart and Dr. Feelgood. Yeah, each of the Motley foursome, they were just in top form on Dr. Feelgood. It's no wonder that the song was the band's lone gold single, and that Dr. Feelgood, the album, was their only LP to hit #1 on the Billboard 200 album chart. Dr. Feelgood was the lead single from the album, rising to #20 on the Billboard Hot Rock and Alternative Songs chart. It would become the Crue's first top 10 hit ever, going all the way to #6 in the last few months of '89. In fact, the week that Dr. Feelgood peaked on the Billboard Hot 100, it was a pretty interesting top 5 that was ahead of it. Lovin' an Elevator by Aerosmith was at #5. Cover Girl by NKOTB, New Kids on the Block, was at #4. Listen to Your Heart by Roxette was at #3.
Listen to your heart when he's calling for you.
Sowing the Seeds of Love by Tears for Fears was at the #2 spot, which I feel is just another song that should have been a #1 hit. We'll cover that one down the road. And then Miss You Much by Janet Jackson was at the #1 spot. Janet would spend a month at the top spot, during which time Love Song by The Cure, Sowing the Seeds of Love by Tears for Fears, and Dr. Feelgood by Motley Crue would all spend time in the top 6. A few weeks before that, Girl, I'm Gonna Miss You by Milli Vanilli would spend time at #1 a couple of weeks as well. Now, I love Janet Jackson, but in my alternate chart history, I'm sure that we could negotiate a share of those 5 or 6 weeks. Maybe give Janet 2 or 3 weeks, and Motley Crue, The Cure, and Tears for Fears, they each get 1 week. That's in my world. Notwithstanding, Dr. Feelgood is #1 in my heart. It's just 5 minutes of gripping bad A rock and roll. Bob Rock conducted his usual high-level prowess as the producer of Dr. Feelgood, bringing out the best in Motley Crue for a landmark record that sold over 6 million copies in America and more than 7 million worldwide. Motley Crue has sold in excess of 100 million units over nearly 4 decades, 25 million of which were sold in the US, making them one of the best-selling glam metal hard rock acts of all time. Dr. Feelgood really is a landmark album. I remember the week it came out. It was the first week of September of 1989. It was after that glorious summer of '89. For my money, one of the greatest summers for blockbuster movies ever. I mean, there was Batman, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Ghostbusters 2, Karate Kid 3, Lethal Weapon 2, Dead Poet Society, Field of Dreams, Uncle Buck, The Abyss. I mean, me and my friends spent the entire summer in the theater. We had just, we just gone back to school, and we were anxiously awaiting all the new albums that would be coming out in the fall. And that's how it was back then. You set your clocks to the new album releases. You counted the days until it came out. You watch MTV incessantly. You listened to the radio every week. You read Circus, Rolling Stone for a clue, an inkling of when these life-changing works would hit the street so you could hear them. 1989, that was the summer of the Cult, Sonic Temple, The Cure, Disintegration, Tom Petty, Full Moon Fever, Great White, Twice Shy, Pixies' Doolittle, Stone Roses' debut, the B-52's Cosmic Thing, Don Henley, The End of the Innocents, LA Guns, Cocked and Loaded, Young MC, Stone Cold Ryman, and of course Weird Al Yankovic's UHF soundtrack. Like I said, I had an eclectic taste in music. I prepared for a fall music preview of epic proportions, from Motley Crue's Dr. Feelgood to Billy Joel's Stormfront from Phil Collins, but seriously, to Whitesnake, A Slip of the Tongue, and Erasure to the Scorpions. I mean, it was all over. I was just chomping at the bit. I'd saved my money for just such an occasion, and then tragedy struck. I lost my wallet. All the money that I'd been saving just gone in a flash. I searched all over, I couldn't find it. My birthday had passed in August, and I was just out of luck. So I begged my dad for some kind of a job that I could do where I could earn some money really fast. Now, as you probably know, I grew up in a small town in Moreland, Idaho. We lived right next to this big canal, and the banks of the canal were just chock full of weeds. Now, you have to understand, to this day, my least favorite thing to do in the world is to pull weeds. I hate it. I loathe it. I despise it. Because my dad wouldn't let me use a hoe. He expected me to dig down to the root and just rip them out, so that they couldn't grow back so easily. It was really frustrating. So naturally, my dad told me that if I would pull all the weeds next to the canal's bank and next to where, the yard and the banks met, and it seemed to go on forever, he would pay me. Now, whenever my dad gave me a job to do for money, he was a notorious cheapskate with me. He offered me 50 cents for every 5-gallon bucket of weeds that he would inspect. 50 cents. By my calculation, I'd need to fill about 13 to 14 buckets of weeds to earn enough to cover just my Dr. Feelgood cassette. So I went for it, man. I put everything I had into it, thinking about how great this album was going to sound in my ears and my stereo. I pulled with all my might, man. I hurriedly crammed the weeds into the bucket. And within about 10 minutes, I topped it off. And I was very excitedly, I grabbed the bucket and I laid it out before my dad. He looked at me. I remember he smiled. Without hesitation, he just lifted up his boot and he just squashed the full bucket of weeds just into oblivion. The bucket was now about a tenth full. I was shocked. He just said, looks like you got more to do on this first bucket. I was devastated. How would I ever get 14 buckets of weeds with him smashing them down? So as I walked back to the banks of the canal and searched for my faith, just then I had this magnificent idea as I looked at the large rocks that were on the banks of the canal. When my dad wasn't looking, I filled the bucket full of these large stones, and then I sprinkled the weeds over the top of it. I was going to pull a fast one on my pops. I got ready for the inspection, and a few minutes later, I flagged my dad down. I said, "Hey, Dad, come over here. I got a full bucket for you to inspect." He looked at me very sternly, and he said, "Why don't you bring him over here?" So, I picked up the weeds, and I started to make my way to him, only the bucket was so heavy that I had to use, both hands, and I almost tipped it over. And as I lunged the bucket in front of him, he, of course, lifted up his foot to smash him, and was met with a solid foundation that his mammoth boots couldn't penetrate. He looked at me very wide-eyed and said, those are some mighty hard weeds, boy. He then picked up the bucket with one hand and he dumped it out before me. Or there was about 12 big rocks and 15 flimsy weeds. He shook his head and said, "Clean this up, redo it, and I'm changing your wage to 35 cents a bucket. I don't care for dishonesty. You know better than that. Don't ever do that again or you're fired." Now, I learned a valuable lesson that day about integrity. Although let's be clear, 35 cents, even 50 cents for a smashed bucket of weeds, it's a scam. It took me a few weeks to get enough together to buy Dr. Feelgood, and come to remember, it was sold out when I finally had the money to buy it. I was so frustrated. When I finally did get my hands on it, though, it was far more valuable to me than if I had been able to buy it weeks before, because I savored it. I earned it. I must have listened to it 12 times the first day I got it. I distinctly remember me and a friend talking, his older brother into taking us to the mall and waiting at the Music Land early morning, sloughing school to get this diamond of rock, this treasure. I remember staring at the cover art for hours. It was just an amazing time to grow up in. That's why this song will always be number one in my heart. It reminds me of hard work, perseverance, and the exhilaration of Vince Neil, Nikki Sixx, Mick Mars, Tommy Lee, their heart-stopping metal attack. The fond memories of when music was harder to come by. It was a valuable part of your existence, and you earned it, you savored it, and because of that, it just became a part of you. Leave us a comment about this amazing song, about this metal masterwork, and about Motley Crue. What are your memories of the days where music was so much more valuable? Please share with me below. If you like our content, we do invite you to be a permanent part of our community by subscribing below. To get this album on vinyl or CD, click on our links below, and make sure to check us out on Patreon. Help us keep the music alive. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.